I went on a 6-week business trip to Europe, thinking that when I returned, I would step back into the craftsman house I had spent my youth restoring with my own hands, a home I had worked tirelessly to buy and lovingly renovated. But when I came back, everything had changed. My father was driving a brand new car, and my younger brother was flaunting glamorous photos from the Maldives on social media. My parents said coldly, "Your house paid for it all." Just like that, they had sold my home to fund their indulgences. What they didn't realize was that the house wasn't just a personal achievement, it was part of a trust fund left by my grandfather. By selling it, they triggered a clause that cost them their entire inheritance. My name is Garrett Miller. I'm 34, an international marketing consultant, and I've lived independently since I left home at 18 in Pasadena, California, determined to make my own way. I don't usually dwell on the past, but to understand this story, you need to know the family I grew up in, a family where love seemed always to favor one child. My parents, Robert and Linda Miller, were ordinary people leading ordinary lives. My father worked at a bank, my mother freelanced as an accountant. They owned a modest house with a white picket fence, a minivan, and the kind of stable life outsiders envied. But inside, the house was anything but stable. I have a younger brother, Brian, for years my junior. From early on, I noticed the stark difference in how my parents treated us. Brian was their golden boy, lazy, unfocused, never holding a job for more than a few months. But they always protected him. "Brian's still finding his way," my mother would say, even after he quit yet another job because his boss didn't understand him. Meanwhile, I worked tirelessly to pay my own way through college. I juggled 3 jobs at a time. Waiting tables, delivering packages, assisting in offices, determined to graduate debt-free. I didn't resent it because I believed hard work would eventually pay off. And I had one person who always believed in me, my grandfather, Norman. Grandfather was my rock during those years. A man with hands roughened by construction work but a heart full of warmth, he would sit with me on the porch, telling stories of his youth and how he had built his life from nothing. "Your strength is your real asset," he'd say in his deep, steady voice. "Money, houses, cars, they're tools. But your will, Garrett, no one can take that away." Those words became a small flame, guiding me through exhausting days. When he passed, I was 18. He left me a trust fund I could partially access at 25, provided I proved myself worthy. And I did. After 7 relentless years of work, I used part of the trust to make a down payment on an old craftsman house in Pasadena. It wasn't a mansion, nothing flashy, but to me, it was everything. A single-story wooden home with a wide porch, stained glass windows, and a small backyard garden. It was old and needed repairs, but I loved every crack in the hardwood floors, every chipped brick in the fireplace. I spent months restoring it myself, sanding floors, repainting walls, replacing window panes. I planted a rose garden in the backyard in honor of my grandmother, who had adored roses. Every time I breathed in the sweet scent, I felt her smiling down at me. My parents and Brian, however, never understood. To them, it was just a pile of old wood. "The kitchen's outdated, the walls are peeling, it's a waste of money," my mother mocked when I invited them over for dinner. Brian was worse. He scoffed, calling me crazy for investing in a chicken coop instead of a modern downtown apartment. I smiled. I knew they didn't get it. That house wasn't just a place to live. It was proof of the years I had fought, the sleepless nights, the moments I forced myself to be stronger. The difference between Brian and me wasn't just personality, it was how our parents treated us. While I scraped together every penny, Brian was handed everything. A new car, pocket money, debts paid off. I wasn't jealous, but I couldn't ignore the unfairness. I had done everything right, worked hard, studied, stood on my own 2 feet. Yet every visit home reminded me of how differently my efforts were valued. I remember one evening after I'd just been promoted at my consulting firm. I went home for dinner, ready to share the news with the family. As usual, Brian was complaining about being fired, again. "My boss didn't know how to use me," he said, holding a beer and glaring at me. Not everyone's as lucky as you, Garrett. Always having everything handed to you. I was stunned. Lucky? Me? The one who worked himself to exhaustion just to get here. But I didn't respond. I ate my dinner in silence and left. I had long learned that arguing with Brian, or trying to reason with my parents, was pointless. Everything changed when a major opportunity came my way, a 6-week international consulting project in Europe, spanning London and Frankfurt. It was the kind of assignment that could elevate my career to new heights. I was thrilled and anxious. 6 weeks was a long time, and I didn't want to leave my house unattended. So I asked my parents to look after it. Just a few visits, check the locks, water the rose garden, simple enough. But as I handed the house key to my father, a strange unease crept over me, as if I were entrusting a piece of my soul to people who didn't truly value it. The last dinner before my flight was at my parents' small Pasadena home. The white picket fence and the smell of grilled meat from the old barbecue greeted me, but the moment I stepped inside, the familiar atmosphere hit me like a weight. My mother bustled in the kitchen, my father watched football, and Brian was sprawled on the sofa, phone in hand, complaining as usual. Work sucks, he said. My boss keeps giving me pointless tasks. Can't waste my youth at that company. I glanced at him, resisting the urge to ask what these pointless tasks were. Instead, I nodded, sat at the dinner table, and tried to focus on the plate of steak my mother had just brought. Garrett, tell me about your Europe trip, my mother said. I knew it was courtesy, not genuine interest. I described the project, an international marketing campaign for a major corporation, meetings with executives in London and Frankfurt, and strategies I'd build from scratch. This was my chance to prove my years of hard work weren't wasted. But my mother's attention drifted to Brian. He's considering a new job, she interrupted, excitement in her voice. A tech startup. They say it's very promising. I paused, my appetite gone. Brian, who never held a job for more than 6 months, suddenly had a promising opportunity. I looked at him, expecting some spark of enthusiasm, but he just shrugged, eyes glued to his phone. Maybe, he mumbled. But it's stressful. I need a break first. A break? I swallowed hard. He'd been on a break his entire life. My father, usually silent during dinners like this, spoke up. Garrett, you're going away for so long, what about your house? I seized the moment. Can you and Mom look after it for me? Just stop by a few times, check the doors, water the plants. I'll leave the key here. I placed it on the table. My father nodded, but there was a distance in his eyes, as if his mind had wandered elsewhere. All right, he said, then turned back to the TV. My mother patted Brian's shoulder. My boy needs to relax. Work is so stressful, isn't it? A heat rose in my chest. Stressful? Brian didn't know stress. He lived off our parents' money while I had paid for everything myself. From college tuition to every brick in my craftsman house. But I said nothing. I had learned long ago that arguing was pointless. I stood, thanked my mother for the meal, and handed the key to my father. I'm off. Say hi to Brian from me when he looks up from his phone, I said lightly. Brian just glared, saying nothing. The next day, I boarded my flight to London. As the plane lifted off, I gazed out the window, picturing the rose garden with its vibrant red petals glowing under the California sun. I told myself everything would be fine. My parents would look after the house, and I would focus on work. But deep down, a small voice warned me. I had just made a mistake. London greeted me with drizzle and a frenetic pace. The project began immediately, and I threw myself into it like a machine. Late-night meetings, endless revisions, presentations to executives. There was little time to breathe. But I loved it. I loved the challenge, the pressure, and the chance to prove myself. Each night at the hotel, I went through emails, sent reports, and occasionally allowed myself to imagine coming home, walking into my craftsman house, settling on the porch with a cup of coffee, gazing at the rose garden I'd nurtured for years. But around the third week, I received a message from Brian. Not a check-in, not a casual greeting, just an Instagram link. I opened it. A series of photos sprawled across my screen. Brian in the Maldives, white sandy beaches, crystal clear infinity pools, a luxurious bungalow with an ocean view. He was wearing a white linen shirt, grinning beside a girl I'd never seen. The caption read, "Paradise found. Need more days like this." I froze in my cold London hotel room, staring at the images as if someone had punched me in the chest. The Maldives? Where did he get the money? He just lost his job, was buried in credit card debt, and my parents weren't wealthy enough to fund a trip like that. I texted back. "Looks nice. Who are you there with?" No reply. I tried calling my mother, no answer. I called my father. After a few rings, it went to voicemail. I tried to settle my mind, telling myself I was overthinking it. Maybe Brian borrowed money, won a small lottery, or something else. But the nagging feeling refused to go away. The following weeks, I tried to focus on work, but Brian in the Maldives haunted me. I found myself checking his Instagram obsessively. Each new post felt like a fresh blow: seafood dinners on the beach, cocktails, sunset selfies, a photo on a yacht with that smug, effortless grin. I couldn't understand. Brian had no money, and my parents weren't flush. Or could they be behind this? I called home more frequently, but the responses were always brief. "Everything's fine, Garrett," my mother said in one short call. "Your house is fine. Don't worry." Her voice was strained, like she was hiding something. My father was even less forthcoming. "I'm busy. Talk later." I tried convincing myself it was nothing, that I was imagining problems. But every night in my hotel bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind my back. 6 weeks in Europe passed in a blur. My project was a resounding success, handshakes from executives, promises of promotion, but that joy couldn't erase the unease growing in my chest. Brian's Maldives posts and my parents' strange evasiveness were pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet fully see. All I wanted was to go home, to my craftsman house, to the porch, to the rose garden, and feel the peace I'd spent years building. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, I drew a deep breath, trying to push away the dread creeping through my thoughts. "Everything will be fine," I told myself, though the voice sounded hollow. I took a taxi to my parents' house in Pasadena to retrieve my key. On the way, I checked Brian's Instagram one last time. I froze. A selfie. Brian standing in front of a brand new SUV, grin plastered across his face. The caption read, "Welcome to the new ride." My heart hammered. Brian didn't have money. He had just lost his job, had debts piling up. Where did this car come from? When the taxi pulled up, a new detail made my chest tighten. In the driveway gleamed another expensive car, my father's, no doubt, its polished surface reflecting the California sun. I stepped out, gripping my phone as if it were the last lifeline in a storm. My father appeared at the door, wearing a crisp new shirt, eyes cold and unreadable. "Come in, Garrett," he said, his voice low, stripped of warmth. "We need to talk." Inside, the air felt heavy, like the calm before a hurricane. My mother sat at the dining table, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the floor. Brian wasn't there, but his presence loomed like a shadow. I set down my suitcase, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's my house key, Dad?" I asked. Their eyes told me everything before they spoke. My mother looked up, lips pressed tight. Her voice trembled. "Garrett, your house. We sold it." The world stopped. I stood frozen, ears ringing, as if someone had struck me in the chest. "Sold?" I repeated, disbelief choking me. "Sold my house? What do you mean?" My mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes. My father crossed his arms, voice firm. "We needed the money, Garrett. Brian needed a fresh start. He deserved to enjoy himself a little. And I I needed a new car. I stared at him, feeling like I was confronting a stranger. My house, I said, voice shaking with anger. I spent my life building it. Every dollar, every hour, every blistered hand from fixing it up, and you sold it for a car and Brian's Maldives trip? I was almost shouting. My father shrugged, as if it were obvious. You're always fine, Garrett, he said. You have a good job. You have money. Brian doesn't. He needs us. I felt my blood boil. Brian was 30 years old. He couldn't keep a job for 6 months, and yet they coddled him like a child. I turned to my mother, searching for remorse, some flicker of understanding, but she pressed her lips together, muttering, You don't understand, Garrett. Brian, he needed a vacation. To recharge. A vacation? I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and sharp. A vacation in the Maldives at a 5-star resort with his girlfriend and friends. And you sold my house to pay for that, to buy new cars? I stepped forward, grabbing my mother's hand, desperately seeking a shred of hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But her eyes told me everything I needed to know. The cold, undeniable truth hit me like a hammer. My craftsman house, the place I had poured sweat and tears into, the home with a rose garden I planted to honor my grandmother, was no longer mine. My father opened a drawer and pulled out a crumpled stack of bills, placing it on the table. This is what's left after we sold the house, he said casually. I stared at the money, disbelief and fury tightening my chest. Without another word, I stormed out, leaving the key and the crumpled cash behind, refusing to hear a single explanation. I took a taxi to my house, or rather, what used to be my house. When the cab pulled up in front of the craftsman home, my heart felt like it had been crushed. The stained glass windows were intact, but the curtains had changed. My rose garden looked different, tampered with, as though someone had disturbed the peace I had spent years creating. I stepped out and froze. An elderly couple stood in the yard, watering the plants. The woman looked up and smiled warmly. Hello? She said. Can I help you? My throat went dry. This was my house, I stammered. The man stopped watering, confusion etched on his face. Your house? Are you Garrett? We bought this house a month ago from your parents. They said you'd moved abroad. My knees nearly buckled. My parents hadn't just sold my house, they had lied, fabricating a story to cover their actions. I returned to the taxi, dazed and unsure. I called David, my best friend from college, now a junior lawyer. David, I need to see you, right now, I said, my voice cracking. He agreed, and we met at a nearby coffee shop. I poured out everything, the Maldives photos, Brian's new car, my father's flashy new car, and of course, the ultimate betrayal, my craftsman house, sold without my knowledge. Each word felt like a blade, but I forced myself to stay composed, hoping David could help me navigate this mess. He listened intently, brows furrowed, tapping his fingers as if sorting my story in his mind. Garrett, he said, voice low but firm. Your house, it's not just personal property, right? You said part of your grandfather's trust fund went into buying it? I nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in the darkness. Yes, David continued. If your parents sold the house without your consent, that could be illegal. But we need to check the specific terms of the trust. Mr. Harrison, your grandfather's lawyer, he's experienced, fair. He can guide you. You'll need evidence, contracts, documents, anything proving they acted behind your back. I sat there, heart pounding. David's words were a lifeline. I remembered conversations with my grandfather, Norman, about protecting the trust for future generations. He had mentioned a protective clause: anyone who misappropriated trust assets would forfeit their inheritance. Do I have a chance? I asked, my voice trembling. David gripped my shoulder, eyes resolute. Find Mr. Harrison. Gather the evidence. You have a strong case here. I left the coffee shop with a whirlwind in my mind, but a spark of hope burned inside me. I hadn't just lost the house, I'd lost trust, security, and a sense of home. But if David was right, I could reclaim what was mine. The image of my rose garden flashed before me, but it was overshadowed by my father's cold eyes, my mother's evasive gaze, and Brian's smug smile on Instagram. I clenched my fists, determination surging. They thought they could take everything and walk away. They were wrong. I would uncover the truth, and they would pay. I immediately called Mr. Harrison, the lawyer managing my grandfather's trust. I had only met him a few times, the last when I turned 25, and he explained the trust's basic terms, allowing me to use part of the funds for my craftsman house. His voice on the phone was as calm and steady as I remembered, but tinged with concern when I told him the urgency of the situation. "Garrett, are you okay?" he asked. "No," I admitted, my voice tight. "I need your help." We arranged to meet at his office in downtown Pasadena, a small building with polished oak panels and the familiar scent of old paper. When I entered, Mr. Harrison stood, his white hair and round glasses giving him the presence of a classic novel character. He shook my hand firmly, eyes sharp but warm. "Sit down, Garrett," he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from him. "Tell me what's going on." I drew a deep breath, fighting back the emotions threatening to spill. I recounted everything, from my 6-week European trip and Brian's Maldives posts, to my father's new car, and finally, the crushing revelation that my craftsman house had been sold behind my back. "My parents sold my craftsman house without ever consulting me. They claimed it was to give Brian a fresh start," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "But that was my house, Mr. Harrison. I used money from my grandfather's trust to buy it. How could they sell it without my permission, Mr. Harrison listened intently, his hand resting on his chin, eyes locked on mine. When I finished, he remained silent for a moment, then rose and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a thick, dark brown leather folder, elegantly embossed with Norman Miller Trust on the cover. "Garrett," he said, his voice low and weighty, "that house isn't just personal property. It belongs to the trust, and you are the sole trustee until you turn 35. If your parents sold it without your consent, this is a serious matter." My heart raced, a ray of light piercing the darkness. "How serious, Mr. Harrison?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He opened the folder, flipping through the pages until he found a highlighted section. "Let me explain the trust clearly," he said. "When you turn 35, the assets are distributed as follows. Your parents, Robert and Linda Miller, each receive $500,000. Your brother Brian receives $500,000. You, Garrett, receive $1 million. You also have full access to that $1 million before turning 35, as you did when you used part of it to buy your house. Your parents and Brian, however, can only receive their shares at 35, and only if they comply with the terms of the trust." I nodded, trying to process the information. "And if they don't comply?" I asked, sensing the answer might change everything. Mr. Harrison's gaze was sharp, unwavering. "There's a very clear clause in the trust, Garrett. Any beneficiary who forges, misappropriates, or sells trust assets without the trustee's consent, will forfeit their inheritance immediately. Not only would they lose their share, but they could also face legal consequences depending on the circumstances." I sat frozen, the room spinning around me. Forfeit their inheritance. My parents' $500,000. Brian's $500,000. All of it could vanish because of what they had done. I remembered my grandfather's words, "Your strength is your true asset." Had this clause been his way of protecting me, safeguarding what I had built? "So, if I can prove they misappropriated or forged the sale of the house," I said, voice trembling, but not with fear, more a mix of pain and satisfaction. "They lose everything?" Mr. Harrison nodded. "Exactly. But we need proof, Garrett. Contracts, documents, signatures, anything showing they acted behind your back. If they forged your signature or used illegal methods to sell the house, we can not only reclaim the property, but also enforce the forfeiture clause." He paused, placing a sympathetic gaze on me. "But you need to prepare yourself. This isn't just a legal battle. This is your family. The word family stabbed at my chest. My parents, the people who raised me, had betrayed me. Brian, the brother I once hoped would grow up, was complicit. I fought back tears. I understand, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. What's my next step? He placed a hand on my shoulder, the same reassuring gesture my grandfather used to make. You need to gather evidence. Find out exactly how the house was sold, who bought it, and how the paperwork was handled. Look for any signs of forgery, notarization issues, anything. We'll have grounds to act. I'll support you through every step, from filing a lawsuit to enforcing the trust's clauses. But you must be strong, Garrett. This won't be easy. I nodded, determination surging through me. Thoughts of my craftsman house, the rose garden I planted in my grandmother's honor, and the nights I labored to build my life filled my mind. They had taken it all, but I wouldn't let them win. I'll find the evidence, I said firmly. And I'll take back what's mine. As I left Mr. Harrison's office, the Pasadena sun shone brightly overhead, but inside me, a storm raged. I pulled out my phone and texted David. You were right. There's a protective clause in the trust. I'll need your help. I didn't yet know where to begin, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't rest until the truth was exposed. I thought of my parents, of Brian, of every moment they made me feel small and unworthy. And I swore I would make them pay for betraying me. They thought I would stay silent, accept the loss, and move on. But they didn't know I was Norman Miller's grandson, the man who taught me that true strength lies in will. And my will now burned like an unquenchable fire. I decided to start at the most painful place, my craftsman house. I needed to meet Ellen and George, the elderly couple, again to dig deeper into the sale. The last time I stood in front of the house, I only knew that my parents had sold it using a forged signature of mine. But I needed more details: who met with them, the exact paperwork, any clues in the transaction. On the drive there, I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the feeling that my heart was being crushed. The craftsman house appeared before me, its familiar stained glass windows staring back, the rose garden unevenly trimmed like an unhealed wound. I knocked on the door, my pulse hammering. Ellen opened it, her eyes immediately recognizing me. Her friendly smile was now tinged with concern. Garrett, you're back, she said softly, her voice tense as if she sensed I wasn't there for a casual visit. Come in. I stepped inside. George was in the living room, a newspaper in hand, but his gaze fixed warily on me. Mr. Garrett, he said, setting the paper down. What brings you here? Last time, you mentioned something about the house. We're still not sure what's happening. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm while letting my determination show. Ellen, George, I'm sorry to bother you again. But I need to know more about the sale. I believe my parents forged documents to sell this house. I need evidence to reclaim what's mine. Ellen and George exchanged a glance. Then she stood and retrieved a stack of papers from a drawer. We don't want to get caught up in trouble, she said quietly. Your parents and your brother said you were moving abroad and needed to sell quickly. They brought a deed of transfer with your signature and notarized documents. We paid in cash, and everything was finalized in just a few days. I held the papers, my heart racing. The sale contract listed my father, Robert Miller, as the seller, with my supposed signature on the deed of transfer. But it wasn't mine. It was close, very close, but shaky and uneven, like someone had attempted to imitate it. This isn't my signature, I said, my voice catching. George frowned. They also provided a notarized document confirming everything was legal. We had no reason to doubt it. I asked permission to photograph the documents, my hands trembling. It felt like I had found the first piece of the puzzle. Ellen looked at me, concern etched on her face. If you're telling the truth, we're victims too. We paid for the house and moved in. If something's wrong, we need to know. I nodded, promising to follow up. As I left, a mix of relief and simmering anger churned inside me. My parents had forged my signature, but I needed more evidence to connect the dots. Back at the temporary rental I'd secured, I contacted David. He agreed to help analyze the documents and suggested checking for related paperwork at my parents' house. "If they took original documents from your house, they might still have them," he said. The thought of returning to my parents' house made my stomach knot, but I knew I had no choice. I had to act discreetly. One morning, knowing they'd be out grocery shopping, I slipped inside. I quietly opened their filing cabinet. Inside were stacks of documents, bills, contracts, insurance papers. My heart leapt when I found a folder labeled Garrett's house. I opened it. Inside were copies of the deed of transfer, notarized documents, and handwritten notes. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately, numbers, dates, and a note that read, "All cash offer, quick and clean." But what chilled me was the notarized document. The notary was listed as John Thompson, yet the signature looked sloppy and unprofessional. I photographed everything carefully, then replaced the papers and left before my parents returned. I now had almost enough evidence, but I needed to understand Brian's role. He wasn't merely a beneficiary, he might have been part of the scheme. I returned to Brian's Instagram, scrutinizing his Maldives posts. One photo showed him with an unfamiliar man standing in front of a real estate office. I zoomed in, recognizing the logo of a local real estate company. This was a lead. I visited the office, posing as a prospective buyer. The agent, a woman named Avery, was eager to help. When I subtly steered the conversation toward the Craftsman house, she nodded. "Oh, the house on Oak Street. That was a quick deal. The seller was Brian Miller. He said his brother was moving abroad and needed to sell fast. We found a cash buyer immediately." I kept my face neutral, though rage boiled inside. "Brian handled it himself?" I asked. Avery nodded. "He brought all the paperwork, including your signature and the notarized documents. We had no reason to doubt it." I left the office, my mind spinning. Brian hadn't just known about the sale, he'd orchestrated it. He was the one who executed it. My father had forged the notarization, my mother had forged my signature, and Brian had handled the entire transaction. They had worked together perfectly to steal everything from me. But they made a critical mistake. They didn't know the house was tied to the trust. And I had Mr. Harrison on my side. I contacted him immediately, sending all the evidence. The deed with the forged signature, the suspicious notarized document, and the information from the real estate agency. He reviewed everything, his voice calm but resolute over the phone. "Garrett, this is solid evidence," he said. "A forged signature and notarization are serious legal violations. We can file a lawsuit to reclaim the house, and the forfeiture clause in the trust can be activated. But you need to be certain, once we proceed, your family will never be the same." I went silent, thinking of my parents, of Brian, of the family dinners that now existed only as memories. "They destroyed our family first, Mr. Harrison," I said finally. "I'm just taking back what's mine." He agreed, promising to prepare the legal documents. "Stay calm, Garrett," he said. "We'll do this the right way." After the call, I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room. I was no longer the same Garrett who had left for Europe 6 weeks ago, believing in a family that would never betray him. Pain and determination had forged someone new. I thought of my grandfather, my rose garden, my Craftsman house. I would reclaim it all, not just for me, but for the promise I had made to him. True strength lies in will. I had enough evidence: the deed with the forged signature, the fraudulent notarized document, and the confirmation from the real estate agency that Brian had facilitated the sale. But filing a lawsuit alone wasn't enough. I wanted my parents and Brian to face the truth in front of the entire family. The aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone who had watched me grow up, who had listened to my parents boast about their golden boy. They needed to see the consequences of their actions, not in a cold legal letter, but in a moment they couldn't escape. I called Aunt Susan, my mother's older sister, who had always been fair and outspoken. She was the only relative who had praised my efforts and said my grandfather would have been proud. "Aunt Susan," I said over the phone, keeping my voice steady, "I want to organize a family gathering. Invite everyone, uncles, cousins. I have something important to say." She hesitated, sensing the weight behind my words. "Garrett, is something wrong?" "I need everyone there," I replied. "I'll explain later." I chose a weekend and borrowed Aunt Susan's house for the gathering, telling her it was a casual family update after my business trip. I didn't reveal the details. I called my mother, framing it as a gesture of reconciliation. Perhaps out of guilt, or confidence that I had accepted the loss of my house, she agreed. "That's good, Garrett," she said, her voice relieved. "The family should come together. Brian will be happy to see his big brother." I clenched my jaw, suppressing my anger. They had no idea this gathering wasn't about peace, it was about exposing the truth. I invited Mr. Harrison to attend as a family friend, bringing the trust documents and the evidence I had collected. "Are you sure you want to do this in front of the entire family, Garrett?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. "This will be a shock." "They chose this path, Mr. Harrison," I said firmly. "I'm just showing them where it leads." On the day of the gathering, I arrived early to help set up tables and prepare food. Aunt Susan looked at me, worry etched on her face. "Garrett, are you okay? You seem different." I gave her a strained smile and patted her shoulder. "I'm fine, Aunt Susan. Today is important." Family members began arriving: Uncle Paul, cousins, a few close family friends. Everyone laughed and hugged, assuming it was just a normal gathering. My heart pounded like a warrior preparing for battle. My parents arrived next. My father in his new shirt, my mother in a light blue dress, her smile confident but forced. Brian strolled in late, wearing the same white linen shirt from his Maldives photos, smirking and clapping me on the shoulder. "Big bro, you're back. How was Europe? Don't be mad about the house thing. Life's too long for that," he said. I met his gaze, noting the arrogance untempered by remorse, and offered only a faint, controlled smile. Once everyone was seated in the backyard, I stood, holding a glass of wine, but I didn't drink. The chatter died down as all eyes turned toward me. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice calm but resonant. "I just returned from 6 weeks in Europe working on a major project. But today, I don't want to talk about work. I want to talk about family, about truth, trust, and the choices we make that affect each other." My mother's eyes flickered with worry. My father crossed his arms, frowning. Brian smirked, clearly expecting an apology or reconciliation. I set the wine glass down and pulled a stack of papers from my bag. Copies of the deed, the forged notarized document, and photos from the real estate agency. "When I went on my trip," I continued slowly, my voice icy, "I asked my parents to look after my craftsman house. The house I had bought with my sweat, my tears, and part of Grandpa Norman's trust funds. And yet, when I returned, I discovered my parents had sold it without even asking me." Murmurs rippled around the table. Aunt Susan covered her mouth, eyes wide. Some cousins exchanged puzzled glances. My mother stood abruptly, her voice trembling. "Garrett, what are you doing? This isn't the place for this." I raised a hand, gesturing for her to sit. "No, Mom. This is the place. Everyone needs to know the truth." I held up the papers. "This is the deed of transfer for the house. It bears my signature, but I never signed it. This is a notarized document signed by someone named John H. Thompson, but the signature is forged. And this?" I pulled out my phone, showing the photo of Brian standing in front of the real estate office. "Is proof that Brian facilitated the sale, lying that I was moving abroad for work." The air grew heavy. Brian's face went pale, and he forced a laugh. "What? What are you making up now, Garrett? Don't blow this out of proportion." I locked eyes with him, feeling every ounce of pain and anger surge. "Making it up? Let Mr. Harrison explain." I gestured toward Mr. Harrison, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table. He stood, holding the trust documents, his voice calm but commanding. "I am the attorney managing the Norman Miller Trust," he began. "The Craftsman House belongs to the trust, with Garrett as the sole trustee. Selling it without his consent was illegal. More importantly, the trust contains a clear clause: any beneficiary who forges, misappropriates, or sells trust assets without the trustee's permission, Garrett's permission, will immediately forfeit their inheritance." Gasps echoed around the table. My mother covered her face, trembling. My father sat frozen, hands shaking. Brian slammed the table. "What? What are you talking about? It's just an old house." Mr. Harrison's voice cut through the room, cold and precise. "Not just the house, Mr. Brian. You and your parents have forfeited $500,000 each from the trust, a total of $1 million, plus a vacation cabin in Big Bear. Additionally, forging signatures and notarizations is a criminal offense. You will face legal consequences." Silence fell, broken only by the soft rustle of the wind in the backyard. My mother clutched her face, stifling sobs. My father approached Mr. Harrison, demanding to see the trust documents. Brian slammed the table again, shouting, "What? Grandpa had that much money and left it all to Garrett. Why didn't anyone tell me?" He turned to me, eyes bloodshot. "Garrett, you knew about this and said nothing. How selfish are you?" I looked at him, seeing a spoiled child rather than a brother. "Selfish?" I said, calm but cutting. "I worked my whole life to prove I was worthy of Grandpa's trust. You, Brian, only took handouts from Mom and Dad, living off deceit. Grandpa put me in charge because he knew I would use it wisely. And now you've all stripped yourselves of your inheritance." My mother rushed to me, tears streaming down her face. "Garrett, I'm sorry. I didn't know about the trust. I just wanted to help Brian. You're his big brother. Can't you forgive us? You can share the inheritance as planned." My father's voice was strained. "Garrett, we're family. You can't let us lose everything like this. Think it over." Brian's tone was almost pleading. "Big bro, please think it over. $2 million in inheritance isn't small." I looked at them all, my mother tearful, my father defeated, Brian childish and angry. Part of me wanted to forgive, to hug my mother and say it was okay. But then I remembered my rose garden, my craftsman house, and my grandfather's words, "Your strength is your true asset." They had chosen to betray me. Chosen Brian over justice. "You're not my family," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Family doesn't steal each other's dreams." My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. My father held her, unable to meet my eyes. Brian stormed out of the backyard, muttering curses. The other relatives looked at me, some nodding, some quietly leaving. Aunt Susan came to my side, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Garrett," she said. "Your grandfather would be proud." As everyone departed, I stood in the backyard, watching the sunset paint the Pasadena sky in gold. Mr. Harrison patted my shoulder. "You did what you had to," he said. "The legal documents are ready. We'll reclaim your house, and they'll pay the price." I nodded, but inside there was no triumph. Only the emptiness left where my love for my family had once been. In the days that followed, it felt as if I were caught in a whirlwind. Mr. Harrison and his legal team moved swiftly, filing a lawsuit in Pasadena court with charges of forged signatures, fraudulent notarization, and misappropriation of trust assets. I spent hours in his office reviewing every document, every scrap of evidence I had gathered, from the forged deed of transfer to my mother's handwritten notes, from the fraudulent notarized document to the real estate agency's confirmation of Brian's involvement. Each piece of evidence was like a knife, reminding me of the betrayal, but also a step toward justice. The authorities moved quickly. One morning, I received a call from Mr. Harrison. "Garrett, they've opened a criminal investigation. Your parents and Brian have been summoned for questioning." I sank into the chair in my hotel room, hands trembling as I held the phone. Images flashed through my mind. My mother sobbing at the family gathering, my father bowed in defeat, and Brian storming off in anger. I didn't want them to go to jail, but I also couldn't let them escape the consequences. "What will they be charged with?" I asked, my voice tight. Mr. Harrison's tone was calm but resolute. "Your parents face charges of forgery and fraud. Brian will be charged with complicity and profiting from criminal proceeds. We have solid evidence, Garrett." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "And my house?" I asked. "We're coordinating with the buyers, Ellen and George," he reassured me. "They're victims too. The court may void the sale and refund their money. Your house will be returned, but it will take a few months." I hung up, staring out the window. The Pasadena sun shone as brightly as the day I'd returned from Europe, but it no longer felt warm. The investigation moved faster than I expected. A week later, I was called to the police station to give a statement. In a small, fluorescent-lit room, I recounted the entire story, my business trip, the shock of discovering my house had been sold, and the evidence I had gathered. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, took meticulous notes. "We've checked the notarized document," he said. "The notary, John H. Thompson, doesn't exist in the official registry. The signature on the deed of transfer has also been confirmed as forged through handwriting analysis." A jolt ran through me. "What does that mean?" I asked. The officer looked at me, voice calm but firm. "Your parents will be charged with forgery and fraud. They could face probation and be required to pay restitution. Your brother Brian will be charged with complicity and must repay all the money he gained from the house sale, including the cost of his Maldives trip." I left the station, my mind reeling. Probation. Restitution. Repayment. The words echoed like a grim refrain. I didn't want my family destroyed, but I couldn't forgive them either. They had chosen this path, stealing my dream to indulge Brian's laziness. I thought of my grandfather and his words, "Your strength is your true asset." He had been right. My strength wasn't in the house, it was in my resolve to seek justice. In the following weeks, my family unraveled. My parents were formally charged, sentenced to 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay substantial restitution, mostly the money from the house sale. They were forced to mortgage the Pasadena home where I grew up to cover the debt. Aunt Susan told me my mother cried every night, while my father barely spoke, sitting silently in front of the TV. Brian faced harsher consequences. The court required him to repay the full cost of his Maldives trip, over $20,000, and fined him for complicity. With no trust fund and no parental support, Brian was forced to confront reality: no job, no home, and a massive debt. I saw him once at a coffee shop in downtown Pasadena. He slouched in a crumpled t-shirt, eyes shadowed, talking on the phone about job applications. When he noticed me, he turned away, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't stop. I had nothing left to say. After 5 long months, I received news from Mr. Harrison. The court had voided the sale of the Craftsman house. Ellen and George had been refunded, and the house was officially back in my name. The day I got the keys, I stood in front of the house, a mix of joy and sorrow washing over me. The stained glass windows were still intact, but the rose garden had withered from neglect. I stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of wood, but it wasn't the same. The house had once been my dream, now it carried the scars of betrayal. I spent days cleaning and restoring, working to bring back its former beauty. But every crack in the walls, every chipped brick in the fireplace, reminded me of what I had lost. It wasn't just property that had been stolen, it was my trust in my family. I stood in the backyard, staring at the wilted rose bushes, wondering if I could revive them, or if I could revive myself. My family was no longer what it had been. Aunt Susan stayed in touch, but other relatives drifted away. A few cousins called, offering sympathy, but no one mentioned the gathering. My parents tried to reach out too, leaving voicemails full of apologies. I didn't respond. It wasn't that I didn't want to forgive, it was that I wasn't ready. Perhaps one day I would, but not now. Brian had vanished from my life entirely. I heard he'd moved to another city, scraping by with odd jobs to pay off his debt. Part of me felt a pang of pity, but a larger part reminded me that he had chosen this path. He could have grown up, stood on his own, but instead he chose deceit and dependency. I sat on the porch of my craftsman house, a cold cup of coffee in hand. The house was mine again, yet it no longer felt like the dream I had built. It was a trophy of my will, but also a stark reminder of the cost of justice. I thought of my grandfather, of the trust, and of how he had protected me even after he was gone. I wondered if he had known that one day I would need the strength he instilled in me. I rose and walked to the backyard, pulling weeds and watering the surviving rose bushes. Maybe they'd bloom again. Maybe they wouldn't. But I would try, as I always had. Justice had been served, but my journey wasn't over. I would rebuild, not just the house, but my life, one step at a time. As I worked, my thoughts turned to the trust fund, the $1 million I would inherit when I turned 35, now only months away. My parents and Brian had forfeited their portions, leaving me with the $1.5 million and the Big Bear vacation cabin. Yet I didn't intend to keep it all for myself. My grandfather had taught me that true wealth is not money, but what you leave behind for the world. I decided to create the Norman Miller Foundation, a scholarship fund for young people who, like me 20 years ago, worked tirelessly and counted every penny to pursue their dreams. Using a portion of the trust, I launched the fund to provide tuition assistance for students facing financial hardship, but with determination and accountability. As I signed the paperwork in Mr. Harrison's office, I felt my grandfather's presence, as if he were smiling down at me. "Well done, Garrett," I imagined him saying. "This is true strength." The scholarship quickly gained recognition. Local Pasadena newspapers ran stories about the young man who turned pain into hope. I didn't seek the spotlight, but I was moved when I received thank you letters from students. One girl wrote, "Thank you, Garrett. Because of your scholarship, I can continue college and become a doctor." Reading her words, I felt that my craftsman house, my rose garden, and even my scars had purpose. My family had become a distant memory. I heard they had moved to a small apartment in the suburbs, living quietly and avoiding relatives. Once, my mother sent a handwritten letter, her shaky handwriting full of remorse. "Garrett, I'm sorry. I only wanted to help Brian, but I was wrong. If you can forgive me, I'm willing to do anything." I read the letter and left it on the table for days. I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to forgive, but because I didn't know how to mend what had been shattered. Brian, from what I heard, lived alone, withdrawn, and seemed to have changed after losing his inheritance. I didn't know if he was truly remorseful, but I hoped, for his sake, that he would one day find his own path. One afternoon, I sat on the porch again, a steaming cup of coffee in my hand, watching the rose garden now blooming vibrantly. The red petals glowed in the sunlight, proof that life could recover even after the deepest wounds. This house, once a symbol of my dream, had become a symbol of resilience. I had lost my family, but I had found the strength my grandfather always believed I possessed. I reflected on the journey, from the shock of discovering my house had been sold, to the quiet days of investigation, to confronting my parents and Brian in front of the family. In America, forging signatures to steal property isn't unheard of. The most painful part is that it can come from those closest to you. But my story proves that justice and truth will find a way to prevail. My parents and Brian paid a price, not just financially, but in honor and trust. I wasn't happy about it, but I didn't regret standing up for myself. I went inside and picked up an old framed photo of my grandfather, placing it on the fireplace mantel. He smiled in the picture, eyes bright, as if he knew I would overcome. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered. Then I returned to the garden, watering the surviving rose bushes. My life, like this garden, would continue to bloom, not because I had everything, but because I never gave up.